Is that up? Down?
Also goes wrong angle.
Hello, people on the internet. Hello, cybers.
It's very weird to do with Rick wrapping my arms around the post. Right.
Hi. Not enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we all set?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah? Okay. You don't need me in the feed, right?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Everyone make sure you look at I'm just going to tell you a couple of things about up and that this is a working space by day. So if you hadn't been here, you know, there are we also have a code of every last bring your of course, if you have always a need to speak. Talk about there is also a form so you can fill that in and say, I want to do not a problem. Whatever level you're ready is in platform, so in particular the Python meetup. Through a variety of channels. There's going to be another a bunch of events are 201 members. You are also on Twitter. Things about today's talk in general, follow the feed, lots of interesting. It's going to be live nights. Back to something. That's you. What is it? Finally, we have a coach which has lots of really different kinds of CSS classes on. And also lots of other kinds of language swag. Some of the examples are over there. All of that goes to this. And so without much further ado and I want to invite Jess to speak. She's a VP of Engineering at Jetpack Workflow, and they're local and they're awesome. And she's going to tell us a bunch of cool stuff. So please give her a warm hand. Oh, that's all right. Moving on over. Good. Yay. So I've been talking to most of you before we got started today. Quick show of hands, how many people are actively working in Rails? Okay. How many people want to work in Rails? Or like, who has never worked in Rails at all? Never seen Rails? So first, my apologies, because this does assume some familiarity with Rails. So if you have a question, there's not a lot of people here today, so just shout it out. We'll do our best to explain. So yeah, Rails. So it's been around for a while. It was originally launched in 2004. In June this year, they released Rails 5, which was a pretty big upgrade. In January, they got new logos because apparently that was a higher priority in getting Rails 5 out. So their new logo is basically their old logo with the word over here instead of below. And it still looks like a tentacle that's going to help Pittsburgh. Is back open, so yay! I think they said they were going to reopen it today at like 3:30, right? Yeah. So thanks, Alternate Histories, for the gospel. So yeah, first part we're going to do is jump into the new pieces introduced in Rails 5. And then we're going to get into all the things that are going to break your existing stuff and make there are plenty. So first, the shiny and chromy stuff. Yay! The big one is Action Cable. So Action Cable is basically what DHH wrote, so the guy who wrote Rails in the first place. This is their implementation of WebSockets. So WebSockets allow bi-directional communication between a client in the browser and a back-end server. So it's really good for things like games and chat and anything where you have like live data streaming. So it's a standard, but it was harder to work with in Rails. So they came up with this package. So here you have Application Cable is the module in which you put stuff in. And the first thing you'll do when you want to start something in Action Cable is create a connection. So that is basically the pipe between the client and the server. And this is a small implementation. Every connection has an identifier. In this case, it's the current user. So that's something available in Rails, is who's logged in. But you don't have to use the current user. You can use any other resource to identify your connection. They'll always have a connect method. So that is what is called when the client tries to establish it. And you don't have to call find verified user, but that is, you can do whatever you think you need to do for your application to verify the user. You can reject people, and that is like a special thing. So, and then on your JavaScript, this is an example of the JavaScript that you would have in the browser, and this comes with Action Cable, where you create the consumer. So the consumer is taking the data, browser, you pass your URL. That's it. Like, that is what you can do to just establish and get that pipe going. So once you have the pipe going, then you have channels, and your channels are your logical bits of application logic. So just like your controllers in MVC, you would have your channels. So for example, you might have an appearance channel. So this is straight from the docs. So in a chat room, this would be like, oh, user showed up, user went away, user went to do not disturb. Every channel will inherit from Application Cable. They will always have a subscribed and unsubscribed methods. So that is what gets called as soon as that connection gets established. And then the other methods are, what is your API? So what are you trying to expose? In this case, this is methods that would be called when a user logs in. Appear. So that's what puts up in like Slack or HipChat. Jess has entered the room. Away. That's what happens when I go idle. So client side, this is in CoffeeScript. I apologize, but that's what the docs do. So here you can see, like, they hooked into the connected and disconnected. So that those methods might update something on the UI. And then they have the appear and the away method are going to hook into. So these are two methods that their other JavaScript or buttons in their UI will call. And the important part is this perform. At perform appear, at perform away. That is how they are invoking the commands on the server. So if you did at perform appear and you didn't have it over here in the channel on the server side, you'd be like, what are you talking about? So, but that's where all the magic happens, at perform. So this is an example of how actions taken by the user in the browser are communicated down to the server. Now, WebSockets are bi-directional. Like, that's the beauty of them. So we don't just want to be able to call stuff. We can already do that, right? That's what we do all the time. But the fun is now we can stream data back. So when from the server. So this is an example of where we're getting data fed to us from the server. So on the server, we have our notifications channel. It has that same subscribed method. But now you see the stream from. So basically what we're doing is creating a name for that particular stream. And you'll see it has the current user ID. So these are specific to a particular resource. So in this case, we're going to have web notifications _1 or 2. So now we are going to then publish events from that particular resource. On the client side, we'll have our subscription, right, to our channel, because that's how we subscribe to a channel. Now we're going to have this received method, and we're going to get the data published from that stream. And in this particular case, it's creating something called notification. So it might get that data, and it might display it, might navigate you to another page, whatever you want it to do. That's your particular. So then, in our other server, here's how we actually broadcast that stream. Say broadcast web notifications, current user ID, and here's all the things that we want to say. So now, whenever we call this server broadcast, somebody on the client side is going to be listening on that received method. They're going to get it automatically. So that's where so we can combine those two scenarios and have our bi-directional communication. I really want to use like build a Cards Against Humanity server. So this is a really quick introduction. This is like a whole another topic. But now you know how to draw a horse. 4 easy steps, right? So I've given you the circles and the legs and the face and the hair. You can go off and add the details. You are ready. The other big thing that they tout is the attributes API, and this was given to us by Sean Griffin, who's a big participant of Active Record and one of our speakers at Abstractions, and Abstractions is really awesome. Yay, Justin, yay. So I will show it to you because they make a big deal about it. And then I will tell you why. So here's a table that we have created in Active Record. Great table, it has a decimal, it has a string, it has a default. Notice there's the default. That's original default. What we can now do is come into the model that's associated with that table, and we can use this attribute term, and then we can override the types. So price and cents was a decimal in our database, great table, and now we're saying it's an integer. So we can sort of use this attribute API to override the types normally assigned to the values. We can also assign new defaults. So we're basically overriding our table definition. We can have attributes defined by a proc. So we can define a method that will establish what the value is. It's not just a static, I set this value, I get this value back. And then, and this is the only one I kind of maybe sort of is this field without DB column. You can establish like a virtual field on that model. So before you could do that with like attribute accessor, but then sometimes you would get into these cases where it was trying to serialize that when it was time to go to the database. Now, this will make it smart enough to be like, we know that this is not a database-backed field. So when you actually call it, so now when we do the store listing, price and cents, it's going to be an integer. And we're going to get the new default, not the original default. We're going to see our proc get defined, and we're going to be able to set these fields without database columns. So this is the kind of thing that sounds pretty cool. This is also the kind of thing, if I had a team that didn't have a lot of discipline, that I would be like, I hope they don't find out about this feature. For the C# guy, this is basically how I felt when like they introduced like static methods, like extending static methods, because I had a team that I was like, find out about it, and they found out about it, and then they just started adding everything in the world to string. Everything became an extended method on the string class. Didn't matter what it was. Range comparisons, sure, put it on the string class. So it's really cool. It's really powerful. I fear that this is going to get a lot of people into a lot of trouble. So use this sparingly and wisely, or not at all. If you're like, should I use this? Probably not. But I'm sure there are also some cases where I'm going to be like really glad that I can do this. And for a lot of this stuff, it's stuff that you could kind of do other ways or with other gems. But now it's all baked in. So one of the other big things that they tout is this API mode. So there's a lot of single page applications. The thing that I make for work is basically a little single page applications. So really what you need your server to do is serve up an API. You don't always need it to serve up pages and render views. You just want it to give you some JSON. So, and I've done this before with Rails. Jeff was with me. And it was possible, but Rails has a lot of stuff in it. And if you're just serving up JSON, you don't really need all that stuff. So what they've introduced is this switch that you can put on the Rails new generator. And so what it'll give you is it'll give you a slimmed down version of the project. Specifically, it leaves out some of the Rails middleware that handles cookies and Flash and some web console. And also, too, one of the things you'll notice is that your application controller, which is the base controller that you're given and all your other controllers will inherit from, it no longer inherits from Action Controller base. It inherits from Action Controller API. So it doesn't have all the availability that you would normally have. You can always add stuff back in, but you're going to start off with a smaller set of things. Now, whether you think this is a good idea to build APIs in Rails or not, another thing. And you could use Padrino or Sinatra, and that's a really good talk. Like a whole nother talk somebody could give on this particular topic that I expect somebody to sign up for right now. So I will call on people. So that's one thing. So it is nice. It is sometimes necessary. That's what you want to do. They now make it a little easier. One of the other big things is that before you had this idea that sometimes the commands that you ran were through Rails, and sometimes they were through Rake. And even those of us who are doing this stuff all the time, fingers just do the talking, and half the time you're typing the wrong one. So now they have proxied all the Rake commands through Rails. So now you're always going to type Rails. So it's just one nicer thing. It's going to be confusing for us old timers for a while, but for the newbies, I think that's a really great thing for people who are new. Because I know when I started out, I didn't understand why sometimes I was typing Rails and sometimes I was typing Rake. I know why now, but it's overwhelming. One less thing. So now you'll type Rails stats, Rails DB version, Rails DB migrate, Rails routes. And because of that, there was a set of Rake tasks under the Rails namespace, which would have left you, and it would have meant you were typing Rails task name, So those have been moved to app to make that a little cleaner. So things under the Rails namespace are now going to be under app. Another thing that they've introduced is their own test runner. So there are already plenty of test runners. Who's using RSpec? Who's using something other than RSpec? Nobody? Yeah. So they've introduced their own test runner if you don't want to use RSpec or Minitest or whatever. And they very happily announced that it can do things like run a test, or run a test based on a line number, or you can configure the output. I'm like, great. It can do all the things the other test runners can do, minus a bunch of stuff. So it is in its infancy. I have not looked into why one would use this test runner over any of the other many fine ones in the ecosystem, but it's there. So you don't, again, it's good if you're getting started in playing. You don't have to go and get RSpec and everything else. So bin Rails test, that's your test runner, baked into Rails. They've introduced a new command called Rails restart. What do you think Rails restart does? It restarts the server. So you don't have to do stop and start. You can just restart, and it'll restart. It's very exciting. Calm down. Another thing that they've introduced is some help with dev caching. So if any of you have ever used the fragment or page or action caching in Rails, Jeff, I know you have. So this types of caching helps speed up your application. So in the case of me and Jeff, we were serving up things for C, a lot of users on it all the time. So you can cache fragments of pages or action responses or whole pages so that you don't have to go back to the server every time. But it's disabled by default in dev. So sometimes you need it turned on in dev so that you can actually debug the problems, see how things work. They've made it a little easier by giving you a new rake task called dev cache. So what dev cache does is touches a file that, now this part goes in your config file. So if you generate a new project, you'll get this snippet in your files, in analyzers. If you have an existing project, you can go find that first line, replace it with this one, because that's how they're now expecting these things. There's a lot of new temp files used to restart things. So this temp cache and dev text, and it will basically turn that on for you. So basically, rather than going into your config, going to find that first line, setting it to true, stopping your server, restarting your server, get back on, you can just hit that rake task, do Rails, and it'll do all this stuff and just restart everything for you. That's kind of handy. So those kinds of things are very production. Actually, at load. People who say Rails is slow and can't handle load are liars. This is the kind of stuff that makes it production ready, and I have proof. So, brace yourself. Now we're at the time where we start talking about the changes, and the breaking changes, and the deprecations. So anything that was deprecated before, if you're using 4.1 or 4.2 versions of Rails and you have deprecation warnings, all that stuff's been deleted. That's the first thing they do when they start the new version, is they go delete all the old deprecated stuff. So if you have any deprecation warnings, you're done. If you have old gems, you gotta update those. So here's the new, some more new stuff, but also some, and you can put this in all your ports. One big change is how they handle callback chains. So this applies to active record callback chains. This applies to active model validation chains. Anytime you have a callback change, you used to be able to return false, and any other callbacks would not be executed. It would stop immediately at that callback. Now, that will no longer be the case. If you want to stop processing of a callback chain, you have to call throw abort. There's a configuration setting that you can now use, halt callback chains on return, so that it'll either just like break outright, or you can set it so it'll give you a deprecation warning. So it'll still technically work with it. But going forward, if anyone was relying on returning false, stop that from happening. Don't do that anymore. Go find all those cases and replace them with throw abort. This is the kind of thing that, like, when you do it a lot. But a lot of people don't even do it at all. Just so you know. Break your code. Active record. This is the biggest reason you should migrate to Rails 5 right now. They added OR to your queries. Oh my God, you can do OR-based queries. So this has been the biggest request for Rails forever, is to be the ability to say, find me this where, or where something else. You haven't been able to do that directly in Active Record. If you wanted to do OR queries with ORs in them, you had to drop down to AREL, which was technically not a public API, as much as people use it like one. So that's like the sort of the AST language of that Active Record builds upon. Or you had to use a gem like Squeal, which has other nice things. So I'm not saying you don't have to use Squeal anymore, but you don't have to just to get the OR. So that is the biggest deal. It's a little ugly, I think, syntax-wise, but it's still better than nothing. So post where ID1 or parentheses the other condition. If you're used to working with Squeal to do this kind of query, it's a little. So if that's all you need, no need to pull in a whole nother gem. Just like we have a common ancestor for all of our controllers, all of our controllers inherit in Rails from application controller and gave you a central place to do code. I have that for Active Record. Like right now in my project, all my models inherit from Active Record base. So if you wanted a common point, you had to make your own and change all your ones. Now new projects will automatically have one generated called application. So they're trying to provide this base class across the system. So again, new projects, you'll be able to do this. Existing project, go back. You now have left joins explicitly. So I think the joins were normal outer joins. And again, to get left joins, drop down to like things like AREL, but now you can also call it just left joins. They're just alias. Same thing. Get you the same. So we have more reversible migrations. So there's a whole migration system built into Active Record, and it's really great. I use it a lot. Did one today. And some of the commands that you can call are like Rails is smart enough to know how to back them down too. So if you want to undo it, but there were a lot of things that still weren't. So you had to explicitly tell it how to back that out if you needed to back. But now change column default, remove index, foreign key, and remove timestamps. Now Rails is smart enough to know how to undo those actions. So it's less code that you have to write. So I'm always happy. I really like their migration system. It's really good. Here's one that has aggravated my team, but not Mark because he's not been there long. When you ran your migrations, it generates a schema RB file. And it gives foreign key a name, right? Common thing. Except those foreign keys had like a random component to it. So if you ran the migrations twice, the only thing you'd have two different schema files, and the only thing different would be those names. So it basically was making spurious changes in your schema file. And then you'd have like, this guy ran it over here, this girl ran it over here, somebody commits it, not really a useful change, but it shows up as a diff in your control system, and it was just annoying. So like it got to the point where like we all had to be very careful, like just never ran the migrations. We always try to load from just the schema, which is a good idea anyway, but still, now they fixed it so that it doesn't have a random component to it anymore. So you'll have a stable name, so you won't get these spurious changes. I should warn you, this is a little bit biased to what's going to make me personally happy at my job. So a new thing that we have is ignored columns in our application. So in our Active Record models, we can now say, there are these columns in the database that I just don't care about. This is really great when you're building a system on top of like a legacy database. There are old columns you don't pay attention to, or you're just not worried about in your particular application. So you can just be like, don't marshal them to me, don't give them to me, just protect. So if you loaded up a whole record, it's not going to give you out. It's also really great, like if you have a shared database, like, you know, if you have, especially with microservices, where each one has their own of the world, view of the world, you know, you don't have to look at everything and sort of scope down to what you care about. So that seems pretty easy enough, right? You just give it like. And then the other thing you can do is now you can give comments on your fields for the database. So this works with Postgres and MySQL. So now you can add this comment field, table definition, and that will get stored in the metadata of your database. So if you have big, scaly, enterprise-type systems for documentation, so they're still comments. They will still rot, and they will still always be wrong. Another thing that they add is indexed error message. So if you had this kind of setup where you had a guitar that had lots of tuning pegs, where you has many relationship, if there was a validation error, this validates numericality of failed, you would get an error that said tuning peg's pitch, not a number, but it didn't tell you which one. You've got a whole collection of them. So then you had to go through lots of games to go and iterate through each one and call valid on each one, so that you, like if you were in a table, which would actually show the error on. Well, now they fixed it so you actually get the index with it. That seems really basic. I don't know why it didn't happen before, but it's here now. So this is going to save a lot of people a lot of work. This is such a thing that everybody in the world does. So thanks for that. Here's the hard part. Here's new deprecations. So these things will still work in your Rails 5 applications, but you will get warnings, and they will be gone in 5.1. So you have to take care of them or never upgrade, and don't do that. Always upgrade. Unique will no longer be available. Unique was being confused with the unique unenumerable in Ruby. So people were getting confused about whether they were calling enumerable unique or active record unique. So they're just getting rid of it. It was actually just an alias for distinct. So you should use distinct instead. So that's a nice, I think that's also another feature that helps. I know I've probably wondered the same thing. Methods like delete all used to take a condition, and now they won't. So you won't be able to pass that query condition straight into the method. And that's because it was confusing, because that's not how any of the other methods work. All the other methods worked by doing aware, getting the result set, and then calling the method on that relation that was returned. So now you're just going to have to switch delete all user ID 1 to where user ID 1 all. So, and that's really about a consistency thing. So that's also nice. This also applies to update and destroy all. So you're just going to have a more consistent API there. User post true. So in association, you used to be able to pass true, and then what that did is force a reload of that entity. So you could always call reload explicitly. So now, instead of passing true to force it to reload, now you'll have to call reload. So this particular case happens like, so when you load up an object from the database, and then somebody else makes a change to it somewhere else, like maybe you call a method and it does something and then comes back to you, your reference is still holding the old data. So you would have to call reload to get the updates. So this is something that happens a lot, more than it should, but. So now everywhere you use hash true, you're just gonna have to say reload. Which I think is nice, because it's much more readable. Like before, did you know what that true meant? Do you have any idea why you were passing true? So readable code is good code. Find in batches and find each used to have a parameter called start. They changed it to begin at. The really fun thing is that they also added an end parameter. Didn't have one before. So they renamed start to begin at. And then they added end, and in the commit message they specifically say it's to go with start. But apparently they didn't talk to each other. So now you'll have begin at and end, and I bet in 5.1 it changed to stop at or something. Now it's our dance break. Jeff's the only one dancing. Everybody has to dance. Okay. All right, so dance party. Now we're on to active model. And I will tell you right now, active record's the one that really got all the attention. So active model doesn't have too many updates. They gave us error details. So before, if you had a validation error on your model, you would get the details, but they would be in strings. Can't be blank. So if you wanted to check which error you got, you had to basically match on those strings, which is always kind of icky, right? So now they gave us something a little bit more systematic. In the case where we're validating name presence, now when we look, we actually get these symbols. So something just more systemic that we can check again. Seems small, but I think programmatically it's a bit of a safer system. Active record used to have a module called attributes assignment so that you could do bulk updates. So you would say model attributes, give it a hash of all the various things. Mark knows because we do this all throughout our code. But they've moved it out into model. Now it's not just an active record thing, it's now an active model thing. So now you can include this model module in any of your classes and get that same behavior, which is a really nice thing. You don't have to be like, this one equals this property equals this. Update them. So that's a nice little thing. Action path deprecation. That's all that was really. There's a bunch of bug fixes, minor edge conditions. I'm gonna go pour through the 3 pages of change logs, which I did to pick out the good stuff. You can, but I think those were the really action path. Render nothing true. That is going to be deprecated. They have a head method that does exactly the same thing. So they want you to use it from now on. So all those places you have render nothing true, you're just going to put head OK, or whatever status you want to return. All their filter methods, before filter, after filter, around filter, they had aliases that were action. Before action, after action, around action. They want you to use the actions of filter methods. So if you're using the filter versions, you will get deprecation warning deleted in 5.1. Skip action callback. You could call to skip a callback regardless of whether it was a before or after or around callback. They're getting rid of that, and now they want you to call the individual versions. So, or skip after. So they're all fairly small, minor things, but if you're using them. Active support. This made me so excited. I put it in our hip chat room on a weekend and told the team we're doing it now. You can now call on weekday, on weekend, next weekday, on date time and date time. Seems so stupid, but like the app I work with like does like really stupid stuff to try and figure it out. So I'm like, I can delete that code. So happy. So happy. Time zone now has script time, which it didn't before. Date time had it, date had it, not time zone, time had it. So it was just like one of those sort of glaring omissions. Array now has second to last and third to last because why not? It is a little bit more readable than doing -1 or minus. Durations now have support for ISO 601. So durations did not have that before. So now you'll be able to parse ISO date formats. You'll also be able to output ISO date formats for durations. And it also now supports weeks and hours. So, or if you inspected an hour, it would give you seconds. Now it'll actually tell you about hours too. Same thing, if you look at a week, it won't just go back to days, it'll give us weeks. So supporting slightly bigger chunks of time. Which is also helpful for my application because it's a lot with time. Scheduling app. Times can fit. Amazing. Cute kitten break. I want this kitten so bad. Cutest kitten in the entire world. Yeah. Palette cleanser, look at the cat, be happy about the cat. Moving on to Action Mailer. So if you're doing a lot of emails in your app, which also might changes. The generators, when you use one of the generators to create a new mailer object, will now actually append _mailer. So like when we make a new controller or a new model, all of our, or like particularly with controllers, the file names are always like _controller. But when you did a mailer, it wasn't. It was confusing because then it looked like a model because that's how we make files for our models. So now it will actually add the mailer suffix. And also, remember I said about how it's so important for production to do your fragment caching? You can now do that with mailers too. So your mailers are just special views. You have views that go to a web page, now you have views that make the content of an email, and now they can be cached. Which emails are really good candidates for like what will benefit from something like a fragment cache. Action view. You can now name your partials emoji. They used to have to be valid identifiers, Ruby identifiers, Rails identifiers. Now they don't. They can be any emoji, and I don't know why. I can't think of any necessary reason for this other than it's fun. But honestly, like, Mark did it, he'd be in trouble. That would not pass code review. But you can do it. You can make it the snowman, you can make it the dancing girls, whatever you want. If you omitted an extension on your file, by default it would try to render it with the ERB template renderer. Now it will use raw, which means like whatever's in that file is getting dumped straight to the screen without any problem. So if you don't want that to happen, put an extension on it so it knows how to handle it. And the mail to helper now can also take or reply to. Nice little benefit. Some stuff got moved out of support from Rails core. So if you want to keep using these things, you're going to have to go get the separate gems. Still available, but you're just going to have to do respond with and respond to have gone to the responders gem. This is something a lot of people use. You're going to have to bring it. Literally just pick the code up and put it over. It'll still work. XML serialization, they just decided not that many people do it. So they're going to drop it from core support. Excellent idea. Good job, Rails team. Assigns and assert template, we use these in testing, in our RSpec testing, or now our Rails test runner. They're now moved out to a Rails control. So that's all. Content tag for and div for, so these were view methods that we could use to build our pages, have been moved out to a tag helper, because really you can just use the content tag, which is still available in Rails core, but they don't really do much. They're just slightly different variations, but you can just use the content tag, or if you really want to keep your div for and content tag for. So, is now things that are gone. They're just gone. You can't have them back. You have to get over it. The rake doc tasks are gone. Nobody used them, just deleted them. Like the 3 people who were using it. Okay. So I'm sure there are gems you can use. If you were still using the legacy MySQL adapter, the MySQL gem, it's gone. Like, you should be using the newer one, MySQL 2. They still have the code for the old one. If somebody wants to pick up support, they said they are free to do so. They'll hand it over, but they're not going to do it. Use MySQL 2. Postgres below 9.1 is not going to be supported by the core team. So, I know particularly sad because they're still on. I don't work there anymore, so I don't care. Yeah, don't use old databases. The protected attributes gem is no longer supported. I don't really know much about it, but it's like a big deal. I included it. Oh, and they no longer support BiBug or debugger. So if you were using debugger for your debugging gem, not there. You shouldn't have been using it anyway because you should have been using BiBug. Just the good one. And you should be using Pry BiBug. Oh, that's what you get for someone. So there are some things that are new defaults. So things are going to work a little bit differently than they used to. The default null value for timestamps. They used to default to true, which meant they could be null. Now they can't. So now the timestamps are required. If you have the timestamps, you don't have to use them. Put it, you're required, but belongs to. This is a big deal. Belongs to now has to be populated. So you used to be able to say this model belongs to another one, but then you could actually have nil for the relationship for the foreign key, which seems weird. So yeah, if you had comment belongs to post, now you have to have the post. You're not going to end up with a nil value. This has made life miserable for people, so this is going to make it better. Disable width on submit tags in your views is now default behavior. The nice thing about this is this disables the button when you hit submit. So you're not going to have double submit. That was a big ask for everyone. Having to do this our damn sales. Now, like that. There used to be a piece of middleware in Track that added a content length header to requests, but now that's not going to be there by default. You can still put it back in, but by default it won't be there. So if you were relying on content, you're going to have to go configure that back in. References or belongs to did not have indexes on them by default. You had to add them yourself by setting index true. Now you will not have to do that. If you leave it out entirely, it will automatically get an index. If you don't want the index, now you have to quit index false. E-tags. By default, Rails used to generate strong E-tags. It never actually validated strong E-tags on things coming in, but it would generate them for your assets going out. So this is part of the asset pipeline. So now it just generates weak ones because that's how it validates itself. You can still put in strong E-tag support. You have to go through a little bit more rigmarole. It's not quite just looking at some of the generators. So definitely like the newbies rely on the generators. Usually if you're doing this after a while, you stop relying on the generators so much, except for maybe like Rails new and migrations also. Like when you do a new project, automatically going to get a README that wasn't there before. It will have the file listener enabled, which is what picks up changes to your application code. So if you use something like Spring, it'll automatically restart the app. That wasn't turned on by default before. And now you'll also get an option to generate logging to out production in the production environment. So that's a 12-factor app thing. So if you're containerizing your application, you want to log the standard out, so then the container can deal with the logging and decide what to do with it. So now there's a setting that by default will automatically. When it generates a partial, you're doing a generator to a view, and this is a really, really small thing. It will now render product as a local value to pass into partial instead of expecting the partial to variable directly. It's a small thing, but when you have people who are new to programming or new to Rails, this is such like a good programming technique thing that having it there and showing people like a good thing to do instead of like a not good thing to do is important. It prompts people into doing the right thing. So this is the right thing to do because your partial could be reused, and now it's tied to a class instance method. So being able to pass it in, that's like sort of a form. So it lets you make that more flexible. So I just, a small thing, but I really made me happy. Random other changes in definitions. No more auto-loading classes in production. Something accidentally got changed in the last version, so that it was auto-loading classes, and basically love under that and everyone happy again. You could, if you were doing a query on type, you had a polymorphic database association, you could pass in a class, and the predicate builder that takes that and turns that into a query string would automatically 2S that class to get the name. It won't do that anymore. Now you have to 2S it yourself. So I don't know why. I didn't really look into it. Okay, sure. Parameters, action controller parameters, so the params that you get passed in on your controllers and that then you look for and do stuff with, used to inherit from hash within different access. So it behaved as a hash. Now it does not. It is just the parameters class, which has a lot of the same methods as hash, but not all of them. So you won't be able to do things like slice. Slice is something that's found on hash that is not found on parameter. You can do a to hash to convert it, but itself, so that might be some small tweaks if you were treating it more like a hash than it actually is. Oh, and the last thing. I have and time is now time zone aware. So now if you ask time what time it is, it's going to give it to you in the configured time zone for your application. It'll still be stored in a database with UTC, but on the way back to you, it's going to be in open. TurboLinks is now on version 5. The last version was 3. They made some changes. They didn't like it. They basically decided to rewrite it, skip version 4, and make it version 5, sync up with Rails. TurboLinks is a thing to do like partial page loading and speed up page times, and I don't understand all the details, and I got bored reading about it, but basically if you're using TurboLinks, it's a complete rewrite. It's completely backwards incompatible, so if you're doing a lot of dependency on stuff with TurboLinks, you're going to have to learn the new TurboLinks. And also, Sprockets 4 is required. So there was a big upgrade to Sprockets, part of your asset pipeline. It got an upgrade. Didn't look into it at all, but it's on version 4. The big thing with Sprockets 4 is that it uses a manifest file now. So I think a file, and now it's a manifest.js, which that's an example. Okay. Most important part. Do all of you know the names of the people sitting right beside you? If you don't, introduce yourself right now. Everybody should know everybody else's name before you leave today. It's a small group. There's no reason for it. Because these are the people you're going to rely on when you go back and start writing code. You're going to talk to these people. You're going to go to the Slack chat. And you're going to ask us all. So I'm in the Slack chat. Got it? You're now set and ready to go? That's me. You can find me on the Twitters and the Facebook. on LinkedIn, whatever. There's absolutely nothing fun in my GitHub. You can look, but you're going to be very disappointed. And otherwise, we have a great community here. Definitely come and chat us up. If you need any help, have any questions about Rails or Ruby or anything, hit me up. I do not hang out in this Slack chat much because it's too old. I can't keep up with all of them. But if you message me or give me a direct message, I always have it up, so my alerts. So that's it. Who's ready? Who's ready to go to 5? All right. Thanks, everybody. Any questions now? Or also just stunned with it? You'll think of stuff later. You're going to cry, you're going to go try and do it yourselves, and then you're going to be like, what was I thinking? All right. Bye, go home.
Or feel free to stick around and talk to each other. That's
Or
also fun.
sit around and talk. What am I going to do to unhook the machine?